This is Diane with Phil's Virtual Sewing Club. Today we're going to get into the uses of some of the accessories that came with your sewing machine. Now, the parts that I'm referring to are the sensor pen and also the guideline marker. If your machine came with these particular tools, then I'm going to show you how to set that up. And I'm going to display, on the video the machines that this sensor pen comes with. Okay, so first off, what we're going to do is we're going to identify our pieces. Okay, this piece right here is your holder. This will hold the pen when you're not using it and so forth. Okay, so to attach this to the machine, over here on the right side of your machine as you're looking at it, there is a little plug that covers up an area. And this little plug is where we're going to attach this unit right here, which is our holder. What you're going to do is you're going to slide it in gently, okay? It'll only go in one position and it's at an angle, so it's nice for storing your sensor pen, okay? Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our sensor pen, right here it is, okay? This here little attachment has little pins on the end of it. So when we attach it, we want to be careful so that we don't bend those pins. Not that you're going to, but you have to line them up just so into the slot, which is just to the lower portion of your holder, okay? And on there, you have like an arrow right here. And you also have an arrow on the machine itself. So you're going to line up those two arrows, and then you're going to gently push that in, okay? And it's attached, and then you're going to place your pen into the holder. Okay, I put it in upside down, so hey, all is good. And then you're gonna attach it, and then a place for your stylus as well. Goes right there. So that's pretty much the installation, how to attach it to your machine. Okay, before we get into the calibration, I just want to make sure that this little plug, that the covering over there, put it in your accessory tray so that you don't lose it. Okay, you may need it for later on if you need to remove this or take it for service or whatever. You may want to use it to plug it up. Okay, so now we're going to get into the calibration. So I'm going to take my sensor pen off of its holder stand, okay, and then I'm going to get into my properties. Properties is down there, and I'm going to touch on this icon right up there, which is, it'll get you into a little further into the properties value, okay, and closer to where that calibration setting is. It's on page 6, and I'm using the Unity machine, so your machine may be set up a little differently. It may be on a different page. So just saying that if it's a little different, don't worry, you're going to be able to find it just fine just by clicking on your properties and then coming up in here on this little check mark with a sewing machine icon. Okay, and then you get into the sensor function calibration. Now, going to click on it. It's going to okay to automatically lower the presser foot. Okay, this machine is so intuitive. It walks you through most every step. So if you get stuck, read the listing of what the machine is telling you, and it automatically will get you to where you want to go. Okay, so here I'm going to say okay to it. It lowered my presser foot. Okay, just as it said it was going to do. Okay, now to calibrate, you're going to start by tapping on the first position. There's a little marker over on the bed of your machine, okay? So what you're going to do is hold the pen in the position that you would normally hold a pen, okay? So I'm gonna hold mine like so. Gonna come over, touch that first mark on the bed of my machine, which is right there. And there's a little dot there. You're going to see that dot when you're sitting right up in front of your machine, okay? The next position that you're going to touch is number 2, which is right here on the bed of the machine as well. So depending upon how you hold the pen, that's the position you're going to touch that dot, okay? Click on OK, and it will have your machine all calibrated and ready to go. Now, if you are someone who is left hand versus right hand, and so you would use your left hand to calibrate. So if you're a left-handed person, you're going to use the calibration, aspect or tools, following and tapping on with your left hand and holding it the same way you would hold a pen with your left hand, and so forth. So, and there again, so if you have two people that are using your machine, or if you're sharing your machine with your daughter or a friend, she might have to come back in and recalibrate for her usage rather than your usage, because everyone holds it a little differently. Some people like to hold it up and down like that and so forth, and that's fine, just so that when you're using the pen itself on your project, that you hold the pen in the same manner. Okay, so close out, get you back to your original home screen. Okay, I have my machine set up with the J foot, because what I'm going to show you is, we're going to use like a straight stitch to begin with, and some of the standard stitches, work best with this J foot, of course. Okay, now we're going to get into the sensor pen. As you see on your screen, you have several icons. We're going to choose the one for the sensor pen, and it's all the way over to the left. Here again, if your machine is set up a little different, that's okay. It'll still have that same icon. And that's the beauty of the baby lock machines. They tend to use all the same icons throughout with all the various machines that are out there on the market. In this field, this is your 4 opportunities that you can utilize with your sensor pen. The first one activates the guideline marker positioning. And you can position, your guideline or your marker that comes out, helps you for guiding the machine or your fabric or whatever it might be, whatever your usage. And once you get into this, you're going to find that you're going to use that guideline marker for a lot of different projects, because it's so helpful. It helps you draw that straight line and show you where you're stitching, so that you can't get off course, or you shouldn't get off course if you're using it anyway. So no matter where you touch on the screen, and I'm going to just come over here, and my right hand is going to be in the way of the camera, but we're going to just tap. Notice how that beam switched positions. So I'm going to do another position, and so forth. And it shows the position that I marked on this screen. So when you have a project in here, say for instance, if you have your fabric ready to go, you've lowered your presser foot, oops, another great function here telling you that you cannot do that in the sensor mode. So this is all good stuff, things that you're going to be doing when you're using your sensor pen, and so it's a good thing they pop up when I'm doing it as well. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to decide where you're going to stitch, or the functionality of the positioning of that guideline marker. So I'm going to say this is where I want it to be. I'm going to close out of it. Okay, now I can lower my presser foot, and then I can use that marker to stitch down that line, stitch right in that ditch. Okay, I'm going to go back in again to show you another function. The second opportunity here is for positioning your needle. Okay, so sometimes it might be easier to position your needle rather than repositioning the marker, okay, itself. So at this time, I'm going to tap on my fabric. So I'm going to say I want my needle position to go right on that line right there. Okay, it repositioned the needle. Well, it hasn't yet, because I have to say okay to accept that position. Once I say okay, it positions it, and then my guideline marker pops up, and I can reposition it as well, depending upon what and where I'm trying to stitch. Okay, that's your positioning of your needle setting. Now the next function on this screen is grayed out at the present time, because this particular function is set up for decorative stitches or for anything that's got any width to it, a zigzag stitch, you know, depending upon, you know, what your application is again. Okay, so I'm going to close out of this, and I have to choose the stitch to begin with. I'm going to choose this zigzag stitch. Okay, then I'm going to come back into my positioning, and notice now the straight stitch or the needle position is grayed out because it won't allow me to adjust the needle position when I'm in a zigzag or a decorative style stitch. Okay, so I'm going to activate that function. Now, this again shows you how intuitive this machine is. It says touch the first point of the stitch width using the sensor pen. Now, when you're using the sensor pen, I'm going to just move it over here a little bit so that you can see this. It's flashing light at this point in time. So that's going to be the first position. So I'm going to tap. Notice how it moves. I'm going to say OK to it. Now it wants me to touch the second point or the width that I want that stitch to be. So I want it a little wider. So I'm going to touch it here, say OK to it, and notice the stitch that has appeared on the screen. So it widened that stitch, and I'm free to go ahead and stitch it out. Okay. The next position, or the next function in this sensor pen opportunity area is, and this is one of my favorites right here, it's the touch the ending point. It'll determine the ending point for your stitches. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to touch on the screen anywhere. And if you notice, you know, I have this marker and we calibrated with that mark right there. Okay. I'm going to touch, you know, somewhere between, you know, on the bed of the machine itself, touch that point, and it's going to tell me how many millimeters it is in length and how many inches, depending upon what you like to choose. So this one is 84.6 and it's 3.33 inches long. So if that's okay, you know, you're going to go ahead and stitch out your particular stitch as well. Down below here, I just want to point some other features that are very, very helpful. So if you've chosen a decorative stitch that has a pattern to it, say like maybe it's a star pattern or maybe it's tulips, whatever it might be, you know, whatever pattern that is, this category right there will form a complete pattern at that ending point. Meaning that depending upon where that's going to end, it's going to recalibrate the stitches in that pattern so that you get a complete stitch when using this particular feature. The other feature is like a half point. So if you didn't want to finish that pattern in its you know, completed form, then you could click on that one and it'll pop it back up and it'll end wherever within that stitch, maybe sometimes halfway through or so forth, depending upon what decorative stitch you've chosen. Okay. In this category, you know, since it's a zigzag, it won't really matter that much where and how I stitch it. Okay. So anyway, but this is an awesome feature right here, because if you have a specific spot where you want the machine to stop, all you're going to do is tap on it and it'll stop on that point. Okay, I'm going to show you, I'll put a different piece of fabric under here just to show this to you. Okay. So I'm going to lower my machine or the presser foot down, okay, and I want to stop it approximately right there, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, let's let the machine do its thing. Another thing I could have done, but I didn't, but I could have done it, is move my guideline marker over to this side so I can designate you know, where that marker is going to be so that I can draw that straight line. So now here again, it's going to want me to reconfirm that ending point. And it's going to happen like this, and this is always a good thing because it wants always to give you the perfect stitch. So we're going to go ahead and say, yes, this is my ending point right there. So I'm going to say close it out. And oops, in this situation, what happened is I repositioned it. What I was going to show you is I was going to put a point on the fabric itself with a marker just to show you how accurate it could be. So I'm going to reset it, and these kind of things are going to happen to you too, and that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to come back in there. Oops, that's not the one. I wanted this one and the end point. There you go. Okay, so now touch the ending point, which is that mark I just placed on there. Go ahead and say okay to it. Okay, and start up the machine. Okay, machine stopped on its own. Let's check out our ending point. Right there was our ending point. Yes, I made it to the right of it, so it's right on though, right on. Okay, see how easy that is? Another feature in this ending point field is this category right over here. In this field, what you can do is you can combine different patterns, okay? And it'll adjust them just like it did over here in the full with the tulips, where it had the full tulip in its finishing point. So what we're going to do now, we're going to grab two different designs and show you how nice that works as well. So I'm going to cancel out of here. I'm going to get into my decorative stitch, character stitch right there. Okay, I'm going to come up to category 7, and I'm going to choose a couple patterns. Okay, I'm going to choose this pattern. It's 7-022. Okay, and I want it to be a single unit, so I'm going to touch this category to convert it to a single unit as such. Then I'm going to choose another stitch or another decorative fill like that one. And you can notice here how one is wider than the other, okay? And I'm going to show you this in the new sensor pen tool function in a second. But right now we're going to accept these. I'm going to close out of here. I want to duplicate these two patterns. So I'm going to come here and say duplicate them, okay? Now I'm going to go over to my sensor pen feature right there, and I can adjust the width on this pattern. Now when I say adjust the width, it's going to look at the width of the larger pattern that's in that field. So it's going to adjust the width. So I'm going to say, okay, I want the width adjusted. So I'm going to come over here, and I've got myself a new piece of fabric. I'm going to say I want the first point width to be right there. Click on OK to set it. And the second point, I want it to be a little narrower. So I don't know if it showed up on the camera, but I adjusted it narrower. So click OK to that. Come back into the sensor pen category. This time we're going to choose the end point. Okay, now when we chose the end point this time, notice how this one is highlighted. The other two are grayed out because that functionality is not usable because we have more than one pattern that we're working with. Okay, so in this field, I'm going to place a mark on my fabric again to show the end point. So, and this is going to be the reference point that you're going to be watching for, okay? So it says touch the end point using the sensor pen. sensor pen in hand. I'm going to touch the point where I marked. Okay, click on OK to set it. I'm going to repeat that 1 second because I want to show you something. Okay, I'm going to repeat it because, okay, touch the end point with the sensor pen. Okay, now I want to just point this out to you. The 80.9 is the distance from the needle to that end point. Okay, and if I wanted to readjust that and make it longer, whatever, you can hit that reset button. Go back in again. That's what I want to do. Okay, here. So I want to make that a little bit longer, like there. It's 84. So we'll say OK to it. I'm going to lower our presser foot. And we're going to go ahead and stitch it out. I just want to remove this thread. Here the machine's going to stop because it wants me to reconfirm the ending point. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to touch on that same point that I'd placed earlier. Go ahead and click OK. Start the machine up. And it'll complete that design. And it'll reconfigure those two designs like they were one design, if that makes sense. And we're going to cut our thread, and let's take a peek at it here. Our ending point and where the machine ended as well. So it was just a tad off, but I would say based upon that stitch and the way it configured it, it did pretty well. Now what we're going to do is we're going to show you some practical uses for some of these features that we went into detail about describing. Okay, so the first practical feature would be to use the guideline marker to piece your 2.5-inch square sections together to create those half square triangles. Okay, so to do that, we're going to have to convert over to a different foot. I'm going to use my 1/4-inch foot in this situation. So go ahead and attach your 1/4-inch foot in the center needle position as well. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to turn on our guideline beam, which is right there. Now, if your guideline beam isn't 1/4 inch away from your needle position, then at this point in time, you can use your sensor pen to adjust that, or you can use the settings right here on the machine as well. So you can move these using your sensor pen as well, so that it lines up with your 1/4-inch marking, which is right there. And I think I've got it set at this time. Okay, so put my 2.5-inch square pieces together. Okay, and what I'm going to do with here is I'm going to line this up so that my pieces, or that my guideline beam runs right from corner to corner on my fabric. Okay, so once you get that set up, and you can use the markings on the machine as well. There's this market or line, or this here little guide right here, which is a 1/4-inch marking line. So if you push that up and over, there we go. Lower your presser foot. Okay, and now what you're going to do is you're going to keep your eyes on the front of the machine. Don't watch the needle, watch the front of the machine where that guideline marker is positioned. And what we're going to do with that is we're going to stitch it from corner to corner. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, push the start button. Remember to watch your marker, not the needle. Go ahead and cut your thread. Now what you're going to do is you're going to rotate it. Okay, so we had it, we stitched it on the left side. Now we're going to stitch it on this side. Okay, so you're going to do the same thing. Line up that guideline marker. And I'm going to slow down my speed a little bit as well. Okay, so at this point we're going to lower our presser foot. Here again, make sure your beam is going, your guide beam is going to the opposite point on that quilt section or piece. Go ahead and start your machine. Okay, cut it. And let's take a peek. There is our piece. And what you're going to do is cut from corner to corner, and then when you open it up, you'll have 2 half square triangle pieces. Okay, so it's a nice fast way and a consistent way to create your piecing. Okay. Another thing that you could do, so if you weren't doing half square triangles like as such, what you could also do is maybe you're doing straight and you want that guideline beam to help you guide the fabric. Okay, so once you get that in there and you want to make adjustments possibly to your guideline beam so it lines up with the edge of your fabric. And here again, we're doing a 1/4 inch seam. So we're going to go and hit the start button. Okay, put your thread. Okay, and here you go. Open it out, press it. Look at that, you've got a perfect seam. And so forth. Okay. Now, if you were going to be doing, I would say like stitch in the ditch as well. If you're going to do stitch in the ditch, what you need to do is to adjust and use your sensor pen again. Okay. We're going to use our needle position. So over here, I'm going to touch the position that I want my needle to stitch in the seam here, in the ditch, they call it. Okay. So to make that happen though, once you touch, you have to always click OK to it, and then your needle will be placed in that position. But before we go any further, so we don't break a needle, we need to put on our J foot. Okay, so this foot was our 1/4 inch foot. Now we're going to use our J foot again. Okay, so here again, let's recalculate that one more time. Our needle position, where are we going to place it? Right there. Click OK to move that needle. And we can also adjust our guideline marker as well. So if that guideline marker, since we've had it on to begin with, we probably will need to adjust it. So there you go. We adjust our guideline marker beam right down into the ditch on that seam. Okay, so here again, we're going to start our machine. Of course, when you're doing the stitch in the ditch, you're going to have your batting on the back side and your or in the middle, I should say, and your back fabric on the back side as well. So that way you're going to get a perfect stitch in the ditch. Okay. Another thing that you can do with this feature is to use some of the decorative stitches to create a crazy patchwork quilt. Okay, so what I've done right now is I'm going to come in and select any one of our characters. So I'm going to use the 7th category, and I'm going to scroll down a little bit to see if I can find some designs, you know, to show you different opportunities. So here I'm going to just use this honeycomb stitch, and I've already put on my end foot as well. Okay, I'm going to lower my presser foot before we get into it, because it's one thing that I always find myself doing, leaving the presser foot up, and then when I'm in the middle of it, trying to lower it, and I can't do it. So right now I'm going to lower my presser foot, okay, and select my category in the sensor pen field. Okay, I'm going to leave the width alone, but you could adjust the width of this stitch if you so choose. Okay, I'm going to choose the endpoint marker to show where I want my point or my stitch to end. Okay, so I've already placed a little line or a little dot on my fabric right here, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch that dot, and that length of that stitch is 92.8 or 3.65 inches. Okay, so I'm going to say okay to accept it, and I'm going to go ahead and start stitching. Well, before I stitch, I'm going to also use my guideline marker. So if I use my guideline marker, I know that I can stitch right on that seam line by positioning that guideline right on my seam line. So there it's positioned. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start the machine. So I'm just going to guide my fabric, making sure it stays straight. Okay, then it says reconfirm the ending point. I'm going to touch that same ending point. Go ahead and say okay to it and start the machine up. Okay, so you can tie off your thread a little bit and cut. Okay, there we go. That's the finished project. So you can see how that stitched right over that seam line and ended just where I told it to end. Let's see, what else? Next I want to show you just some projects that I had worked on, you know, using some of these features. And the first one, my partner in crime, she did a little hot pad using a blanket stitch. Okay, and when you're using a blanket stitch, this is a great opportunity to use that inline marker. And then if you make sure your needle ends in a down position, you can turn your corners and have a great stitch every single time. And so she did it 4 different times, and it turned out beautiful all 4 times. Okay. Another feature that I utilized in here was using like a serpentine stitch on this here project that I worked on. It was just like a holiday theme for a 50th birthday celebration, and using my marker, my guideline marker, as an indication as to the positioning, and it helps me align the stitch, that serpentine stitch. And I also made an adjustment to the width on the stitch as well. Okay, so that was a great little project for showing the inline marker and also the guide beam, you know. Another project that I was working on was for Christmas, actually. So I kind of got in the spirit of things. And with this project, I stitched out or embroidered out a design, okay, which I had created in in my software, embroidery software package, okay? And I used a ribbon stitch here. This is one of the satin stitches that's built into the machine itself. So I used that along with the guideline marker, okay? And the stitch in the ditch, I did right in there. And then I used another serpentine stitch for my sashing. I don't know if you can see this, but there's rows of stitches over here in my sashing where I added and did a quilting stitch, you know, to hold that all together. And then right up in this area, I did use my or my guideline beam or guideline marker to, you know, to put that light across from corner to corner. That way I get a straight stitch from corner to corner and finished off my corners. Okay, so this was a great project that showcased some of those features that we talked about here as well. Here was the last project that I'd worked on. Okay, it was using the guideline marker, and I stitched rows of stitches using that guideline marker, using a straight stitch. And we're not in the straight stitch category here, but what I was going to do to end it off was to use a decorative fill to fill up this area right here. Okay. But anyway, these are some great project ideas that possibly you can utilize and take advantage of some of these features in this particular area of the machine, you know, which I found was a lot of fun, you know, using any one of these 4 features and so forth. Okay. So have at it. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and if you have any questions, make sure you contact Larry or Annette at Phil's Sewing in Washington, Missouri, and they would be happy to answer any questions. Or if they don't know the answers, they'll contact me or Cindy as well, because Cindy's my filming partner here. So either one of us will be able to answer any of those questions if Larry and Annette have any kind of questions concerning these features in the machine itself. Okay. And they'll be able to tell you as well some of the machines that they have that has this wonderful feature on it. So until next time, I just want to thank you for spending the time with me today, and we'll see you next month possibly. Okay, thank you and have a good day.